So, as I said, usually I'd be welcoming you all into Westgate Hall, chatting, having a drink, showing you our lovely Edwardian drill hall. It's a venue that's right in the centre of Canterbury. For those of you who don't know it, we're just off the high street within Canterbury city walls. And we say it's where village meets city, really. That's how we describe it. We're now obviously a COVID secure community space, as if everything has to move to that. But a lot of heritage that hall has, and well, normally full of events. Today, instead, I'm chatting to you from my comfy chair in Broadstairs with a coffee, yes, all ready to turn the mute button on because my son may pop in this door at any moment. So apologies if that happens, but, you know, go with the flow. That's our life at the moment. So during this very strange time at the hall, we've continued to do a lot of our civic duties. So at Westgate Hall, this year has been very much about the blood donations we've put on, but we also were able to, in October, manage to get the Canterbury Festival into the space, which was fantastic. It's the first time they've put the festival on, and we got it just over the wire before we went into lockdown again. But, you know, we've had some brief performances, we've had some of our markets, we have our Westgate Hall market, which celebrates independent makers, and also our record fairs and regular sessions. It's not been as many as we normally would have, but hey, we'll have some hope in the future that there will be more coming. And we also work with a fantastic group called BMix. Now, if you haven't come across them, they work with adults with learning disabilities, but they also do a fantastic cook along every week, and that's been virtual too. So I guess today I've been reflecting on how we came up with the idea to just celebrate International Women's Day. Well, for me, it started 4 years ago, really. And it was at Lily's Cafe in Palace Street. 12 of us sat round at the biggest table in Lily's. It's not a big space, but we all sat round chatting, listening, making friends and connections. And really from there, it grew. So my challenge 4 years ago when I did join Westgate Hall in a new role was that I'd moved away from my community in London. I'd moved my family. It was a big challenge. I'd lived in London all my life, you know, for over 13 years of that. I worked on the South Bank, worked for an organisation called Coin Street Community Builders, which is a social enterprise. It runs the Oxo Tower and various other community events, and has a nursery, a children's centre. I helped it to thrive and helped to be part of building that community. So when I came to Westgate Hall, for me, it was about, you know, moving to a new role. It meant hit the ground running, getting to know a new city. I'm a London girl. I love a city, and I quickly adopted Canterbury as my city. I became a board member of the BID, which was really crucial to me at the time, which was fantastic, met some new people. I also chair their marketing and events group and committee. So it's helped me to connect with Canterbury in a really different way, get to know many, many people. More importantly, it's helped me to showcase Westgate Hall and what we do in that space, which is really crucial. Usually we'd have around 50,000 people through that hall, which is incredible. You know, students, parties, celebrations. We've got a bar, we've got a cafe, we do markets, fairs, celebrations, commemorations, you name it. But this year it's been around 2,000. So it's great to have you join us. You know, I think there were 93 people registered, which is wonderful. Thanks for taking the time out to celebrate, listen, contribute to the breakout session a bit later on. Yeah, I'm just quite overwhelmed, really, sitting in my chair. I'm so used to being very animated, so I'm having to try and keep within this little square, which is quite difficult. But thanks for going with it. It's very informal today. We've got two fantastic speakers. And before I do that, I just want to introduce my chair of trustees from Westgate Community Trust, Imogen Morizet. She's been there for me for the last 4 years, particularly steadfast during COVID. I couldn't have done any of this without getting through it with those incredible volunteers who are our trustees. You know, impossible to get through it in one piece. So I'm just going to throw to Imogen, who's going to say a few words to you. Is that okay, Imogen?
Yep, it absolutely is. Hello, everybody. It's absolutely fantastic to see you all. I cannot believe 93. It's incredible. And Clare is absolutely right. She really, with all her vavoom, she's got vavoom. She keeps us focused, and she comes up with great ideas. And that's what we've done, nothing but benefits since she's been with us. And thanks so much to the BID for being with us. It's just fantastic. And to the Sheriff of Canterbury, who is out there. I hope, but as we've all turned off our mics, I hope she'll identify herself later, as I hope my fellow trustees will when we go into breakout rooms. Our Board of Trustees has shifted as we've grown. We set up 11 years ago, and they've always the board has always reflected where we were as an organisation. And for about the last I'd say 4 years now too, timing with Clare, we're actually all women, it's just turned out that way. We represent women between the ages of from the mid-30s through to mid-60s. So you've got a gorgeous spread there, great personal stories, great professional backgrounds too. And Claire keeps us on our toes. What can I say? Right now, I'm sitting in Hoath between Sturry and Broomfield. I hope you've all got your mugs of coffee. I feel as though this is BBC World Service, frankly. I mean, I just love it to know where you're all sitting and how you're all tuning in. But what I really wanted to say was we're not physically in the hall, and Claire's absolutely right, but we are in terms of the ethos. And when I say that, it's about how the trust started, which was it started as a group of residents who had another idea for the fate of the hall. It was the recession, and the council understandably had to save money somehow. And the hall is over 100 years old. It needed desperate refurbishment, and it was obvious, knock it down, we can have parking spaces and we can get some extra money in, and that made total sense. However, the community came together, and yes, there was pushing backwards, shoving backwards and forwards, but in the end result is, the reason why we're here today is that everybody spoke to each other. The council worked with us, private sector, residents, and the not-for-profit sector. All of us came together, and that is the ethos. People came together because they identified a goal, which was to have a place where the whole community could come together. And so International Women's Day absolutely fits that profile. The trust and the hall is about community and building and strengthening connections. So I would just say COVID has given us maybe a great opportunity. We've all been shaken up in the most unbelievable ways and across every aspect of our lives. And maybe it is a chance now to streamline our thinking, rethink our structures, rethink why we do things before we slide back into the comfort of what is familiar and makes us feel secure. Perhaps you just slide in that little question, is this fit for purpose? Do we really need to go back to doing things that way? And that also fits in with the International Women's Day theme internationally, which is choose to challenge. And we've interpreted this as challenging the norm. So I just put it out there to you all. This is a little revolutionary time here. We've got space and time, maybe not so much time left, but we can do something fresh and new, and we can work together in new ways. And I just put it out there. I'm a great believer in that. So there we go. Back to you, Claire. I better stop, otherwise I'll be on my soapbox for the next half hour. Over to you.
Thank you, Imogen. That was great. You've done really well on the time. We're only 5 minutes over, I think. So I just thank you also for putting into perspective, what's important about International Women's Day and celebrating that information. And there's loads of information on their website, which I'm sure you can all explore. So more importantly, now we're going over to our speakers. After that, so Caroline's going first, then Rachel. Each of them will tell you a little bit about their perspectives, professional, personal, different perspective completely. But when we spoke to them both and invited them to come and speak, we didn't stop laughing, really. So I've just thank you to both of them, because during the time that I've known them, we've had more laughs than anything else. And I think that's helpful, as well as being serious when you need to be, of course. But I'm going to go to Caroline Cooper first. She's the Head of Commercial and Cultural Development at Canterbury City Council. Now, after we've done both of the speakers, we'll have a Q&A, and if you can pop your questions in, I can see exactly what's really nice is everybody's putting in their names, their links. So please do get a chance to have a look at that. There will be a recording afterwards, and in the breakout sessions you'll get a chance to get to know each other more, but thank you for doing that. So Caroline, I just want to say it's great to have you. Thank you again. She's got a really broad team, Caroline, and I've got to know a few more of the members of them over the last 6 months, particularly given what's been happening. Challenging time for them all round. Great for her to join us, share more about herself. And I think I'm going to throw over to you, Caroline. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Claire. Hi, everyone. I know a few of you, but for those that I don't, yes, I'm Caroline Cooper, and I'm going to talk loosely about women in leadership, a few things my team at the council has done since COVID emerged, and hopefully what we could all hope and ultimately decide to gain and retain when the world shifts again on its axis. A little bit about me for way of context then. I am the head of commercial and cultural development at the City Council. That basically means I oversee our work around direct cultural provision, such as museums, and support for the cultural, for venues, events, cultural policy, as well as cultural, voluntary, community and sports sectors, analysis, providing grants or strategic funding where that's appropriate or indeed possible. And I also hold the brief for City Council internal commercialisation, performance management and continuous improvement of our services to the public. And I think that's about the fewest words I can use to hope to make that brief make sense. I've been at the council for more than 15 years now, having started as tourism marketing assistant when I was 25 and never having held the same role for about more than 2 years. I love local government, I really do. It's exhausting, occasionally frustrating, underappreciated, and at times, as we've discovered this past year, harrowing and terrifying. But it can absolutely also undeniably make a real difference to people's lives. And it's also occasionally a safety net that most people don't really know is there. So it's sort of like a fifth emergency service just underneath the AA. I was genuinely flattered when Imo told me I was going to be doing a talk today. And even though every instinct in my body was telling me to run, screaming for the kitchen or somewhere exotic, I remembered some genuinely useful constructive criticism that my wonderful best friend, confusingly also called Caroline, had recently given me and accepted the invitation. In addition to Caroline Hicks, who some of you may know, who is in herself extraordinary and brave, insightful, full of empathy, I have been lucky enough to have some incredible role models over the years who have either directly displayed the behaviours I've wanted to emulate or have enabled me to strive to be fulfilled in my own unique way. Apparently, I'm a bit Marmite though, which was an expression that I'd never heard till I was about 20, but you wouldn't believe how many times I've been instructed on my own personality type ever since the famous brand of yeast extract coined the phrase. Mostly by men, if I'm being honest, which is not to say there's not some truth to it. Honestly, when I'm in the mood, I can annoy myself. I just find the comparison a little bit lazy, reductive, insufficiently nuanced, which is kind of a bit of a theme. Anyway, role models in no particular order. My maternal grandmother, Hilda, which literally means battle axe, had the most dreadful time of things. Her husband left her and 3 kids in 1954 when that was just really not a thing. She was absolutely skint, so she became a dressmaker and took in lodgers to make ends meet and just kept on. Tragically, when her eldest son, John, was 21, he was killed on exercise in the army. My mum and her twin, Andrew, who were 14 at the time, and they all discovered this had happened by seeing it on the news. And Nana Hilda, somehow, just kept on. 7 years later, her other son, my mum's twin, Andrew, who had been an incredible cyclist, he did the equivalent of the Tour of Britain now, was cycling to see his girlfriend and was killed by a joyrider who had stolen his dad's Jag. Nana Hilda somehow kept on, except of course she didn't. She was hollow and broken, but her tenacity was indescribable. It was untouchable. Whenever I was bored as a kid, which was often, she would scold me knowingly and say, "Don't wish your life away." I try not to. My parents, obviously, but unusually maybe for this topic, my dad, who objectively never understood the, in his mind, completely arbitrary and absurd culturally imposed differences between men and women. He was an engineer, a diagnostician on nuclear submarines, and he has taught me how to do loads of cool stuff. He still does, but mainly to be a critical thinker and never to accept that the world just ought to be different for men and women. Finally, there's Anne, my aunt, sort of, who still sticks a rocket up my backside when I'm feeling overly self-indulgent or sorry for myself. She's currently 82 years old, lives in Croyd, which is a mega surfers beach in North Devon, and she goes bodyboarding there every single day. Unless there are too many riptides, then she pops along to Putsborough. I called her on New Year's Eve to say I was tempted to do a New Year's Day dip, but it was like a bit cold. So she basically told me to stop wanging on, or I'd just be really cross with myself. She said the same about this talk. So, insightful, tenacious, empathetic, no-nonsense, critical thinker, the characteristics and behaviours of each of these fabulous individuals have been in some way outside of the accepted norm, have challenged the status quo, and they've been really formative to the type of traits that I believe are essential to good leadership. Anyway, I grew up in Medway, did actually really well at school until I had a bit of a wobble during my A-levels and discovered firsthand the fragility of mental health, which that was an eye-opener. Screwed it all up and dropped out. I was working at Clark's, Hempstead Valley at the time, and Blue Water was just about to open. So my manager offered me a post there as a supervisor while I figured out what the hell I wanted to do. I was 18 and I thought that this meant I was so important. I had staff, I had 20 staff, and they all had to do whatever I said. I think I may actually have swung my keys around at one point on my hip just to really illustrate my power. So the second crashing realization of my young adulthood occurred in as many months. Perhaps actually didn't really help for people in authority to behave like an idiot. Perhaps, in fact, it was a bloody terrible idea and nobody would respect you or help you or make your life easier, and inevitably you would end up doing less well. I loved Clark's. I really, really loved it. And I loved the attention to detail in retail. I loved my team and the experience that it gave me. But eventually, after having been a store manager for a couple of years in Blue Water, I realised I wanted to try and get to uni after all. I wanted to get to a point in a career that I loved where I could make some decisions, because half the ones I saw in life were questionable at best. So I figured I could have at least as good a go. Plus, I was terrified. So I had to show myself that scary things weren't always scary for good reason. True enough, but I have to relearn that every single day. Bit like Drew Barrymore in 50 First Dates. Anyway, I ended up here in Canterbury, got a 2-1 in marketing and French, didn't want to go back to Medway, so managed to finagle this really sweet gig as a local government officer. That brings us roughly to here, and fast forward to the pandemic. Actually, I want to briefly change lanes and talk a bit more about leadership qualities. That team of 20 I had at Clark's were all women, probably actually all about my age now, maybe some younger, older, maybe they wanted to fit in, weren't earning some money between parenting, or indeed just they like meeting people and being sociable, whatever. But none of them were on a career path or were using it as a stepping stone to their next move. And I mention this because I think it liberated them to not put up with my key swinging nonsense. If someone wants to progress in any institution, logic dictates that you have to some degree, both work hard and make a reasonably good impression on those that make decisions. So the behaviour of those in charge matters. It matters a great deal to the self-respect and the confidence and the morale of individuals and teams that work together. And yet historically, and indeed in most cultures now, management and leadership traits are grounded in the masculine. In the peeing contest, in the aggressive, subdue your opponent, appear strong, don't blink culture, which certainly I'm sure was really useful, like back in BC, something to do with tigers, saber-toothed tigers or something. But it's innate, not informed. It's emergent, not empirical, insufficiently nuanced. Bit like comparisons between a complex human individual and a controversial toast topping. A King's College sociologist stated recently that female leaders may be more able to adopt cautious, defensive policies compared to male leaders who are bound by gendered expectations to be aggressive, forward, and domineering. Gloria Steinem once said, women are always saying, but in an American voice, women are always saying, we can do anything that men can do, but men should be saying, we can do anything that women can do. So, to turn the paradigm on its head, because why not, the world's gone nuts, what could men learn from typically female leadership qualities? I am in no way an expert on this, but inevitably have been around long enough to have butted heads with lots of randomly patronising individuals displaying objectively male characteristics. So here's my top 5 female traits that I really genuinely try to live by. 1, think first. That's it. Just stop and take a breath and really try and understand what is the problem you're trying to solve. Consider it academically. What don't we know? Consider possible options and consequences. What's the worst that could happen by pausing for breath? If you don't leap into action, will the saber-toothed tiger definitely eat you? Or will you rush into its path so Barney Rubble doesn't consider you a wuss, thereby making the tiger aware of your existence and instantaneously think, oh, snack! To use one of my favourite West Wing lines, see the whole board. Number 2, so what? Studies show that women are more likely than men to lead through inspiration, transforming people's attitudes and beliefs, and aligning people with meaning and purpose rather than through carrots and sticks. Think NASA and the janitor that said they put the rocket on the moon. So really connecting every individual with and their contribution to the bigger picture. This type of transformational leadership is linked to higher levels of team engagement, higher levels of performance, and better productivity. Men spent more time trying to win people's hearts and souls and nurturing a change in beliefs rather than just behaviours. You know, they could be better leaders. Number 3, know your own flaws. Of course, self-belief is really hugely important and stops you from freezing and inertia, but self-awareness, tricky to do with a fragile ego, is equally, if not more important. It enables you to see how others perceive you, even if it's not always flattering, and gives you the capacity to close the gap between where you are and where you want to be. Remember that constructive criticism I said I got from Caroline? It's absurd and irrational to pretend we don't have limitations, but understanding how that fits in with your objectives will enable better outcomes. People who see themselves in a more critical way than others do are better able to prepare, even if it means over-preparing, and that's a pretty solid way to get better at stuff. Number 4, focus on elevating others. Again, female leaders have been proven to be more likely to coach, mentor, and develop their direct reports than male leaders. They are true talent agents, using feedback and direction to help people grow. This means being less transactional and more strategic in your relationship with employees. And it also includes the openness to hire people who are just better than you, because your ego is less likely to get in the way. Most of my team are just way better at me than a great many things, and that's fantastic because, well, I'm a bit lazy and it means I've got less to do. 5, finally, and I think probably the most important one, is collaborate and listen, aka shut up sometimes. Respect your colleagues. If you've spent time and energy curating and developing a team, knowing how their skills complement each other's and your own, and their strengths fill gaps where others have weaknesses, use that. I honestly, genuinely believe one of the biggest strengths of our team is the respect we have for one another and the culture we've nurtured, wherein it is perfectly okay for any of us to be wrong. As often as necessary, actually, until we're right, to throw around ideas and think a problem through from everyone's perspective. It certainly helps to see further down the road where the juggernaut's coming from. And we'll come back to juggernauts. So in terms of the theme of this talk then, and kind of women paving the way, I think from my perspective, a big part of that is being just overt and transparent about these truths and these differences, and it's not strengths over weaknesses, it's, you know, it's a balance and it's a portfolio of different characteristics. So it's also about intellectually persuading people, male colleagues as well, who, to be fair, in the main aren't generally aware of the privilege from which they operate. It's just the status quo. So why would people want to be persuaded, and why would they want to be persuaded now in particular? Okay, It's pretty simple right now. Or there's a really good reason. Countries with women in leadership have suffered fewer deaths from COVID-19 than countries with governments led by men. Countries led by women had systematically and significantly better COVID-19 outcomes, locking down earlier and suffering half as many deaths on average as those led by men. Now, this analysis of 194 countries, which was published by the World Economic Forum, so legit, suggests that the difference is absolutely real and may be explained by the proactive and coordinated policy responses adopted by female leaders. While soft skills are absolutely and undeniably important, women leaders were also the ones that listened to the scientists despite public backlash and showed the ability to exercise good judgment in the face of harsh criticism and concerns relating to short-term economic effects. Even after clear and frequently cited outliers such as New Zealand and Germany and the US for men were taken out of the statistics, the study found the case for the relative success of female leaders was only strengthened. So I said we'd come back to juggernauts, and my professional juggernaut of 2020 and that of many of my colleagues was the hub. The COVID Community Hub identified, communicated with and distributed food, medicine and other supplies to the most vulnerable in our community throughout the first wave of the pandemic. Lockdown in England officially began on the 23rd of March with the stay-at-home order. We opened the hub 3 days later, supplying food, prescriptions, essential items and support to those who had been advised not to venture out for any purpose. In preparing for this talk, I looked back at the archived transcript we kept of our Google Hangouts group, which we used to, it's like a chat function, which we used to make super fast decisions in between the twice daily meetings we had that bookended our days for several weeks. The transcript of that chat is 235 pages long, and a lot of it made me cry. The City Council was never set up to deliver this type of role, and there wasn't a department within it that had the capacity, let alone experience. But my service had, at least, very recently set up a brand new, never before delivered service, just that was an ice rink. So all that stuff I said about teams, teams assessing the problem, my phone's ringing. Teams assessing the problems you were trying to solve, respecting each other's strengths, safe spaces to be wrong, occasionally shutting up. Yeah, that. March 23rd, national lockdown. Some rumour that councils may have a role in supporting the vulnerable. TBC. Who or how many individuals may be involved? TBC. What their needs would be? TBC. Kind of get the idea. So once it had been decided that our service should take a lead on it for the council, we got the hive mind together and asked that question. What don't we know? Our guiding principle was just don't drop anyone. So we approached it like a marketing campaign. Who is our target audience? What demographic and psychographic characteristics might they share? What proxy data sets do we have that we can use? Elections, council tax, lifeline? For example, if you need an assisted bin collection, are you more likely to now need to stay home than otherwise? Once we'd identified the cohort, how do we communicate with them? We didn't have email addresses or phone numbers, and many of the individuals we inevitably would have needed to reach were in the digitally isolated bracket. So our go-to social media push wouldn't be fit for purpose. We went old school in the end with a radio interview. That was horrible. And a targeted leaflet drop. Some districts blanket dropped leaflets to all their properties, which is totally fine. And some quarters were questioning of our decision not to. Certainly would have looked good, but our strategic overview of the problem highlighted that we could end up stimulating a much greater demand than we could actually cope with. And in that general melee, people with the most urgent needs could get missed. So we went with the data. As another note on the transcript, which is a note from me, I was clearly in a bit of a mood going, there seems to be a feeling that we're sitting on our hands because people just like to see noise and bluster, even if it's not very helpful. That's clearly I was having that same thought at the time. So in parallel with who are they, where are they, how do we talk to them, was the mega logistical challenge of actually getting food to people, chief amongst which was the fact that there was no food. Supermarkets had strict limits on shopping allowances, and we were buying for X times loads. We hadn't figured that bit out yet. Ultimately, we had the leader of the council personally call various store managers, and our existing suppliers that we use for weddings and functions and stuff were amazing. But in the first place, I ended up marching into Aldi with my purple council lanyard, a bit like my keys in Clark's, and explaining to them they absolutely had to let us have more food. They were fab, to be fair. But at one point, we were clearly getting desperate because somebody on the transcript suggested that we go to Ann Summers and buy the little willy pasta shapes that we could put in the food parcels, until someone else pointed out that they'd limited those to 2 per person anyway. So we also didn't know how deep the well was, where the funding was potentially going to come from to pay for it. But we also knew absolutely that we couldn't let that get in the way of genuine need. So within that first week, we also launched a donations page alongside our signing up for volunteers page for people to make a contribution. And lots of people have been asking what they could do. And it was genuinely useful funding, and it went straight to pay for those food parcels. But again, it must have been getting really hysterical at some point, because there's another note on the transcript where Michelle's gone, oh, wait, we must remember to get some comms out on the food. So, you know, like, so we can tell people what they're using their money for. Like, so you bought a goat, like, i.e. like Oxfam. To which I've gone, can we buy goats? Is that? And Michelle's gone, brilliant. Why not? Then everyone can make their own milk and cheese. So we're all good. Yeah, they were long days. This new service that hadn't existed until 3 days ago also had no staff, of course, and we didn't know how many people were going to need, how many people it would need, until we knew how many people would need it. So it started with about 8 or 9 of us literally just sketching this out as we went. Ultimately, those few of us, amusingly but not unsurprisingly, largely reprised the roles we had on the ice rink. So Guy was data, Holly was comms and fundraising, Ali was people and voluntary sector, Stacey was logistics and supply, and so on. But really, all of it was all of us. Theoretically, the role of local government hubs was limited to providing food and prescriptions. But of course, as we have explored, these things are often insufficiently nuanced. And the needs of the community at the time of the first wave were more varied than I think any of us could have imagined. There were some heartbreaking stories. An elderly gentleman in his 80s whose daughter had come to visit him and stolen all of his food and money. A couple who both needed medications would likely die without them, but had no way of getting them. I spoke to a mum of a young child on the shielded list who had such complex medical needs that his parents were full-time carers, and he was so vulnerable that nobody could leave the house. Of course, his government food box was just enough for him. And anyway, that wasn't any use because he was predominantly tube fed. I spoke with another lady who told me that she'd been planning to take her own life that very afternoon, but now we'd phoned, she had hope again because she knew she wasn't on her own. There were many other wonderful moments as well. The thanks we had, so many people went out of their way to email us, to write to us, to say how we'd changed their view of the community, but particularly how we'd changed their view of the council. I think most of us that worked on it were moved beyond anything we kind of expected, and I have certainly never been prouder of that fantastic group of people, nor of anything that we've achieved. So just a few stats on the hub. By the time we finally closed it on the 4th of July, it had 134 council staff redeployed to work there, 11,685 hours worked, of which more than 7,000 were on phone calls to vulnerable residents. 1,012 volunteers signed up, of which we ultimately used 278 to fulfil so many deliveries to residents. We received public donations of over £38,000, which was nearly half the total cost of the overall hub in the end, at 85,000. And we delivered to people in true desperate need 801 life-saving prescriptions, 2,242 healthy, balanced food parcels, with some biscuits, because, you know. Oh, and the shielded list, as of today, I checked it this morning, currently stands at 10,880 people, or 6.5% of our local district population. So I guess to pick up the theme and in very brief summary, what can we harvest and why would we want to from, well, I guess in terms of the hub as an example for me and how and why it succeeded, I always want to work like that. And evidence is telling us that it leads to better outcomes at all levels. So for me, let's enable more nuance, better dialogue, more honesty, less fear of failure, more collective responsibility. That would be my aspiration, and what I would like to get from this strange and really unsettling COVID opportunity. And hopefully it's now or never, because I don't want to live through this opportunity again. That was me. Thank you very much. Hope it wasn't boring.
Not at all boring. Caroline, how could you say that would be boring? Come on. Thank you. What an incredible journey, a personal, I've got a lot of clapping corners. That's not raising of hands, but that's clapping of corners, and I'm sure some questions, but brilliant. And, you know, I knew some of it, but I think things that I take away from that before we move on to Rachel, because she's going to speak next, is, you know, you go from ice rink to community hub. And I think for me, it's that adapting and that flexibility, but also the stats and the data and the emotional element to it. And yeah, I don't want to live through this opportunity again, but let's seize it and do what we can with it. Marmite is one of my favorite things, to be honest. So maybe I'm a bit Marmite too. I've never thought of that. But thank you so much, Caroline. What I'm going to do now is say to everybody, if you've got a question for Caroline, if you want to put it in the chat, I'll save it for the Q&A. That was great. If you want to take a moment to just make sure your video's off, have a drink, just very quickly. And I'm going to introduce Rachel Sanders now. So I first met Rachel, I was thinking back, it must have been a networking event, I think from the BID. She just made me laugh. Well, I think anybody who's worked in London, I'm drawn to anyway. So we had a lot of chat about the South Bank, about architecture and buildings. She's got one of the most stunning stores in Canterbury. If you haven't been to it, BoConcept, please do when we can go into the store, but you can go to them online, which I'm sure she'll talk about. But I twisted her arm, or Imogen and I did, maybe not too much twisting, but when we talked about Westgate Community Trust and Westgate Hall, we knew we needed to do something about our mission, our vision, and our values. This was pre-COVID. And she helped us with a couple of colleagues. They came in and we did a really great session. It was about a 2 to 3 hour session with about 25, 30 people. It was unique. It gave us a great starting point for our business planning for the future. And we still refer to it all the time. So this is just to say, I'm going to hand over to Rachel Sanders now. Thank you very much. Looking forward to hearing from you. I'll unmute myself. Rachel?
Hello.
Hello.
A video on, that would be great.
Ah, how are you?
I'm very good. I'm very good. I'm very good. Could Rachel pop my video on? Is that possible?
Absolutely. Yep. Here comes Rachel's slide.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And good morning, everyone. And you know, thank you to the guys at Westgate Hall for inviting me to do this. Honestly, there's nothing more I enjoy than speaking to 90 odd people first thing on a Friday on Zoom. So it's awesome, the response you guys have had. So where to start? Well, I thought a really good place to start was to talk a little bit about who I am. And I didn't really want to go through my CV because it's all about construction and property and things like that. But I thought maybe I'll do a wee mood board, and that's what you can see in front of you now. This is my mood board, and I thought it would give you a little bit of insight maybe to my beliefs and what's influenced me, and maybe sort of give you a bit of a hint of what I'm going to talk about in a wee bit. So you'll see that there's a very Scottish feel to this. And you know, I was brought up in the northeast coast of Scotland, just beyond Aberdeenshire. And, you know, I spent a lot of time in my childhood cycling to the seaside and walking in the beach and playing in the dunes and going into the sea and jumping off harbour walls, would you believe, into the North Sea and all that sort of thing. So it was an absolutely glorious childhood. And also, if you know Scotland at all, you'll know that the west coast of Scotland is very, it's roaming in, the gloaming and the heather and the mountains and all that business going on. But the East Coast is wild and it's cold. And, a few weeks ago, Braemar, which is to the west of Aberdeen, hit -25, So when we were in Kent, we're going, oh, there's a little bit of snow, it was wild there. And it has to be said, beautiful beaches. So I love, love, love the landscape. And in the top left corner, you'll see a castle that's called Slains Castle. Now, it's a ruin now, but it was actually where Bram Stoker apparently got his inspiration for Dracula. And it's right on the cliff edge. And apparently, it was also in season 1 of The Crown. So there you go. And you can just imagine the wildness and the crashing of the waves into that cliff and the exposure to the elements that, we see up there. And of course, in the background, you'll see the Northern Lights. And we're so far north there that we can see the Northern Lights. And if certain disturbances happen in the Arctic and the solar winds, it creates charged particles, and that creates these bursts of energy. And if you've ever seen the Northern Lights, you'll understand just how amazing and a force of nature they are. They're all different colours. And in fact, there is a song about the Northern Lights of Old Aberdeen. The Northern Lights of Old Aberdeen mean home sweet home to me. And there's a lot of research around the Northern Lights because they reckon that if they can just predict where these atoms and protons are going to be and they capture them, well, they can power whole cities. But they look amazing, and they call them the heavenly dancers. They dance across the sky, says the song. And that is where I'm from, and that's where I lived, with the forces of nature. And on the right-hand side, you'll see, this is my family, talking of forces of nature. And you'll see me there with my dad. And my father comes from a fishing family, but he didn't want to do that. So he chose to join the RAF. He became an engineer, and of course, he ended up in the oil industry. And what that meant for me was, throughout the 70s, he just wasn't there. He was working abroad. He was in New Orleans and in Calgary and the Soviet Russia, and he was on supply boats and oil rigs, but he just wasn't there. And that meant that we had to, us girls, had to get on without him. And the black and white picture there, well, that's my mother, and she was an amazing woman. We lost her a few years ago, but she was a businesswoman. She was a campaigner. She founded at least a couple of charities that I know of, and she did a lot of counselling work. And she was, an incredible woman that inspires me to this day. And she had a real sense of fun, bit of a party girl, and you can imagine we got into all sorts of scrapes together. And, I'd love to tell you some of those stories sometime, but we haven't got time today. But let me tell you about what you can't see in that photograph, because she's actually sitting in a wheelchair. Now, she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was 3, and by the time I was 12, she was in a wheelchair. And this is a picture of her with my daughter. Now, you'll see that this is called an electric blanket. Now, when we were coming in from the cold, out of the sea, it's, oh, I'm cold, Mum, give me an electric blanket. And she would wrap us in this blanket and rub us really hard so the friction got you cozy. And that's, I think, what she's doing in that picture. And I look a bit like my mum as well. But, we're constantly getting mistaken for one another. But, multiple sclerosis is a horrible disease, but it never stopped her. And honestly, I am quite sure there were some horrendous moments I wasn't aware of. And I'm also aware that there were some horrendous moments I was. But my father, he was away and we were just getting on with whatever life threw at us, and we made the most of it. It's pure and simple, because she had things she wanted to do. She had things she wanted to achieve, and she had no time to spare, as we didn't know what tomorrow would bring. And I can remember coming home from school and she would be on the floor because she'd fallen. And you know, if you ever work with someone that falls a lot, or you live with someone that falls a lot, you will know that they never fall in a convenient place. It's never in the middle of the floor. They're always in a tight corner between the wardrobe and the chest of drawers, or the bath and the toilet. They're always jammed in somewhere. And you know, often we had to just sit and figure it out and calm down and figure out how we were going to get her up. And I remember one time she actually fell between the car and the pavement curb. And, well, no, actually, I'll stop there. She didn't fall, I dropped her. Yeah, we had this idea, it was probably when I was about 19, we had this idea that we would buy an MG sports car, because that is the most practical thing for a woman in a wheelchair. So I drove the sports car home and we got her in it, and of course, you know, gravity's on your side, you know, it's really low, and we went touring through the village, top down, you know. Mum was sitting in the car waving at all the villagers, Barry Manilow playing at the height, you know, Coco Cabana. And of course we got home and I couldn't get her out, so I dropped her. And not on purpose, it has to be said, but you know, when you're laughing so much, all the strength goes from you. And you know, she was useless because she was laughing, and I was useless because I was laughing. So we just sat on the pavement for a bit, and we finally sorted it out. But we had great adventures together, and yes, we couldn't do what everyone else was doing, but we adapted so we could go to the theatre, or we could go for a picnic. You know, we couldn't walk along the beach together, but I could walk, and then I could go back to the car and we could watch the waves together and have a wee picnic. So nothing stopped her. And she was so resilient and so goal-focused. You know, she wanted to get me through primary school and secondary and university and onwards. So she researched how she could slow the disease down. And she was on gluten-free diets before that was a thing. You know, she took supplements and she did everything to keep her well enough to reach her goal. Plus, you know, all this charity work she was doing, right up until about 5 years before she died. So she taught me that great things never come from comfort zones. And I love pushing myself out of comfort zones. And today I try to embrace the unpredictable, the wildness, the challenge, and I just love in my life. I'm able to go hill walking, and there's also a wee picture of me dangling off a rope in Costa Rica there, which did petrify me, but you know, it was good fun, especially when my feet were on the ground. Now, going back to the family, you'll see I've got 3 what we call young adults, and a very long-suffering husband. And you know, my kids, they just amaze me every day. And my heart is just full of pride and joy for them. And you know, God knows how they've turned out as normal as they have, because you know, I had a big job in construction and industry and property for many years, and honestly, it was just bedlam in the house. And you know, funnily enough, they're very independent adults now, so I'm super proud of them. And I've got this thing, a goal without a plan is just a wish. And do you know what? I would love to say that I have a sort of plan. I think it's true to say that I've got a rough trajectory, but I think because of the unpredictability we had with my mother, that we just had to take it as it comes. And although I love that graph of this is what I planned, actually the reality is that squirrely mess on the other side. But that's all about resilience, isn't it? So you can drop the mood board now, Rachel, and I'll brave, and maybe you can get my camera on. I don't know, is that possible? So that's who I am. Get that on, getting a wee notification. Is that working? Can you see me now? Okay, awesome, right. Sorry, I've come as close as I can to the Wi-Fi, so I'm paranoid that my Wi-Fi is going to drop out, so, and it's all different. So anyway, so that's who I am, but what am I? Well, I'm a businesswoman, I'm an enabler, and the really fun bit, I'm a disruptor, and I think Clare and Imogen have experienced a wee bit of that. So let's pick this apart a bit. Business. I've had the absolute pleasure of running small businesses and growing them into much bigger businesses. And you know, my team was $40 million in construction before I left the corporate world. And you know, obviously I've then gone back to a small business. But the key with that is taking everything you learn on each stage of that and moving it forward. So that's the business. Enabler. And I think I like to enable my customers to experience that extraordinary, to have exceptional customer experience, to create space that feels like home. And you know, you don't have to believe me on that. You can go and you can look at our Google reviews, and when we open, you know, come into the store and look at my beautiful store. I think I also enable my colleagues. I enable them to be the best they can be. Now, a lot of that right now is around wellness development. I want them to be rewarded. I want them to develop themselves in every aspect, and I want them to enjoy working with me and being on this business journey that we're on. And I believe in meritocracy. I believe in reward. And I like to think I enable my community. Goodness grief, that's why I'm here. But you know, it's a pleasure doing stuff like this and talking about how we can challenge our business community going forward, because the upshot is I know that if the businesses and the community around me are successful, I will be successful too. And you know, I think I've got some insight that I can contribute on that. And then of course, I enable my family. I enable them to follow their dreams. And you know, they're going to make their own mistakes, but I will always be there to support them and help push them forward. So that's the enabler bit. Now, the disruptor bit. Now, this is where my wicked sense of humour comes in. And it's really interesting. And you know, this is something I don't really do on purpose, and it's a knack, it's something that just happens to me, but I challenge the norm. I have a knack of seeing an angle that others don't. And, you know, I've been invited on lots of boards and committees for that very reason. And I remember one of my old business partners saying, you always bring the people into the room, because I always had a different point of view. And I guess it may be because of the lessons that my mother taught me and how we lived our life. But you might have heard of something called Cartesian coordinates. Now, can you imagine a plane flying in the sky? This is how they figure out how they figure out how to plot where that plane is from the different angles, and being able to see the different angles and to be able to get its exact position. And I use that, and I also use something called, well, I call them thought grenades. I don't think they're a thing really, but and basically this is when you're in a meeting and you just lob in this thought straight into the meeting, and you know, just watch it go and see what happens. But to challenge the ideas coming out of that, and that can be a real benefit right now. And I think we need to challenge the norm right now. not to get swept away, but it's the ability to look from different angles, to have a different mindset to everyone. And it reminds me of this story my son told me. He had had a presentation from a fighter pilot, and this fighter pilot was in a conflict, and he was talking about how dreadfully outnumbered they were by the enemy. And of course, the question arose, wasn't he scared? And what he said was that as much as it was a dreadful situation, they spoke about it, the other pilots and him spoke about it as an abundance of targets. Now let's think about that. That situation they called an abundance of targets. You see, he knew he had to protect the other pilots and the people on the ground and the people on the ships, so he had to change his mindset to alter the view from something that was dreadful to something that was positive, just to get through the day. Now, I know some people don't like to talk about COVID as a war or a battle, but I can assure you that there are some people out there, and maybe some in this group, that's exactly what they feel they've just been through. But like that pilot, we have people to protect around us, and women are incredibly good at this. And let's face it, we have to protect our family, we have to protect our friends, we have clients to protect. I'm protecting my business. And so we need to look at things from a different point of view. We need to find our abundance of targets. We need to find our abundance of opportunities. And I know there's been some terrible circumstances, and Caroline's alluded to a lot of them, but I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about challenging the norm, and I want us to think about how we find our abundance of targets and opportunities. How do we create the positives out of this? And I think there are some already. And there's some really big opportunities here if we just look at things from a different point of view. So let's talk about those, right? Working from home. The property industry and the management consultants call this agile working. And we've been talking about it for 20 years, about how it can help businesses cut costs, how it can create more diversity because you can bring in people that wouldn't normally work or couldn't normally work in that environment. We can start to employ more working mums or people who care for other people who can't be in an office or travel to an office to work 9 till 5. We can start talking about reducing carbon by reducing traffic. We can increase our working time by reducing travelling time. And we can create work-life balance and wellness. And we've learned over the last year that actually it's someone's output that matters, not how many hours they sit at their desk and often stare out the window. We've learned to be more connected in the home. Who had heard of Zoom 14 months ago? I certainly hadn't. And who could have attended today's meeting, actually, if they were working? So we know our community better. I buy bananas for the old lady down the road. She never asks me for anything else. It's always bananas. I think her Ocado shopping is on the Monday, and by Saturday she needs the bananas are needing renewed. But never before have so many people volunteered. There's people volunteering at vaccination centres. They've never volunteered in their life, and now they're getting involved in their own communities. Shop local. We've discovered the little coffee shops and the bakeries and all these little businesses around us that frankly we just bypassed before. And just maybe we've got a bit kinder, maybe a bit more patient, and I'm really hoping that we can keep some of that. And I don't know if you had heard I think it was the Scottish Health Minister actually, he was talking to the Queen about bottling the community atmosphere. And isn't it great to see more people walking? Families playing football in the park. We're focused a bit more on health. People are running, cycling, walking more. And how many people have baked bread for the first time? There seemed to be this whole flatbread sourdough thing going for at least the first 4 months of lockdown. And these are all new things we've brought to the fore. And then I look at the business level. In my business, we've had to be innovative. We've had to change our approach. And now I'm networking with a much broader audience. We've managed to connect with a much broader audience through social media. We've increased our digital capability. We're engaging with our business community. And we've done a lot of staff development. We have really picked apart our systems and our processes to see how we can improve them, so that when we do open our doors, bang, we're out there. And we've used our time well. And I honestly believe, you know, my team are closer, they're more focused, and frankly, they just can't wait to open our doors again. And I know, you know, from a personal point of view, I've changed my mindset. You know, I think I'm a pretty resilient person, and I've talked a bit about that, but I've taken time to learn new things. And honestly, my vegetable patch did incredibly well in the summer. You know, it fed us for months. I've spent time with my family, I've walked miles from my door, I've discovered new things, and I've even lost some weight. So, your mindset, seeing a different way, seeing the abundance of opportunity that lies ahead is so important, because those opportunities do exist. And like the fighter pilot, you need to find a way forward. And, you know, gratitude. Be like my mother. Have gratitude for what you have today. Value it and hold it dear. You know, I'm always hearing about what we've sacrificed. Well, let's start talking about what we've gained, because we've gained so much. And I believe with a different view, we can create opportunities. And that, my friends, is my challenge to you today. Together, we can find good out of this situation. Think about more what we can do. New ways of working, new ways of engaging, new ways of building our community stronger. And how can you create your abundance of targets in the future? And if you don't believe me, and you don't believe you have opportunities, you know what? I am super cheap nowadays. You don't even have to buy a coffee. You know, I bring my own on Zoom. And I will promise you that I will find your abundance of opportunities. So just call me, honestly. I'll help you find the value. And there's some really innovative times coming ahead. You know, we've changed so much more in the last 8 months than ever before. And, you know, just looking at some of the names on this audience list, I know there's been some fantastic work already done out there. But beware. It can be uncomfortable, and you will be out of your comfort zone. And yes, you will need to be resilient. So please take action, choose to challenge and move forward, and be the best you can be today. Thank you for your time. I'm Rachel Sanders, businesswoman, enabler, and of course, disruptor.
Well, there's that virtual audience, just my little clapping and all the rest of us. Rachel, thank you. Thank you doesn't stretch as far as it could at this, but so much to unpick, inspired. And also because I know you a bit, and because of what you shared with us, I have to say, really, really thank you so much for sharing so much about you and your family and your mum, your incredible mum. I have got tissues beside me. And I'm sure other people have. My sister's on this call as well, so I know she'll have tissues beside her. But also, it's that rallying call, you know, we all need it. And I felt like you just reached out with your hand and just grabbed us all then and went, you can call me. You know, how much could you hope for more than that on a Friday morning? And more than anything, I think it's also about being out of your comfort zone. Exactly. And we don't always want to listen to those disruptors, but actually, if we don't, then we won't hear and we won't think about the full picture. So I really, really appreciate that. I'm sure there's lots more we can talk about. And in fact, this is the opportunity for some questions to Caroline, who equally did a fantastic, you know, sharing with us, and you did, Rachel. I'm keeping an eye on some questions, but I've got one from myself, because I think, Rachel, you've more or less set down, and I know we talked about, you know, the question we're going to use in our breakout group shortly, but we've all gained something. That opportunity and that gain for each of us independently, and whether it's business, whether it's looking at things differently, speaking to people. And I think that resonated with me, that the reach we've got now is far greater. My goodness, the amount of people on this call today, I'm really chuffed. There's quite a few women here from my peer support group, which I started during this time, that was through the Kent and Medway Business Hub. And I never have been involved in anything like that. So I have to give them a big shout out as well, because they've really helped me through this time, as well as lots of other people, men and women. But I might ask a question of Caroline, actually, if that's all right, because I haven't got a particular question come through yet. Caroline, because I may not be in your breakout group, given what Rachel has said, if you've got any questions maybe for Rachel, maybe that's the way to do it, as a kind of panel particularly, or anything that resonated with you from what she said, because you both shared such incredible personal stories, which is amazing, but it shapes you. Those things really do shape you, don't they?
Yeah, I think so. And I haven't really got any questions as such, Rachel, but I found myself kind of I guess uplifted by hearing the parallels in what Rachel was describing about, you know, the kind of the experiences that have shaped her, and that it felt like a really kind of similar journey. And I just think, you know, absolutely ways of working differently, and you know, that's something that it's possibly been a little bit trickier to do in kind of the environment in which I work, you know, in the government setting, and it's, you know, has been very much more kind of regulated and regimented. But I've actually got a fabulous, she's amazing, one of our team, who is our director of museums actually, and she moved to Maidenhead about 8 years ago, and so she was going to leave. And I was like, no, you may not leave, you are far too good. And she said, but I can't travel in. So it was probably one of the first examples within the city council where we had someone kind of remotely working most of the week. So Michelle's worked from Maidenhead for 3 days a week, you know, for the last however many years. And lots of people said, well, that will never work. And of course it did. And you know, Rachel made a comment about it's about output. And I just couldn't agree with that more. You know, within our kind of group, I'm just like, well, here's the thing we need to get done. Let's ensure it is done. Whether we go from A straight to B, or fine, or we could go up there, turn around a bit, go left, come back. It doesn't matter. It's about those outcomes. So it's how you achieve it, and actually allowing people or enabling people, as Rachel said, you know, to be their best selves and to contribute in the best way. I think it's that, you know, keeping your eyes focused on what, you know, that thing I said, so what are we trying to do? And I just think it's really heartening to see that conversation starting to become a bit more mainstream. And as you say, this, you know, for me, the pandemic has really enabled that. It's also, on a personal note, much better, because my husband works at Imperial College and has done for nearly a decade. So he'd be out of the door, you know, at stupid o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock, and get home at sort of 7 all the time. The kids are little, and all of those expectations that you have, that just things have to happen, you know, be made to happen, like the passive voice when you've got a family. And I know that this will resonate with lots of us here. They just sort of happen by magic when there's only one of you doing it. And actually, it's been a really valuable learning experience for Coops as well, I think. And you know, he's always been pretty good, because you know, I'm pretty lazy when it comes to the parenting stuff, but I think he's had his eyes open to how things can work better, and there's certainly a desire professionally and personally to want to capture some of this stuff. And why would you chuck out the positive? So I just think it's really, in terms of what Rachel had to say, I just thought it was fabulous that clearly, we're all sort of moving, I think, in the same direction, really.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah, keep hold of that. Definitely. And how can you not lose that, because it could easily be lost. Rachel, did you have anything further to add? Because I've potentially got Imogen, who's always burning to ask a question. I don't know if, of us. I think the agile working really sticks out as well for me, and also value and the closeness you get with the people you work with. I'm working in a really tiny team. You've got an amazing team, but it doesn't matter how small or how large, it's that closeness. And that to me is one of those things you don't want to lose. And I think it would be pretty, it will be easy to do that, but it'd be just as easy to lose it. How do you think, for anybody sitting on this call now, do you think there are those things that you're thinking as an agile team, Rachel, with BoConcept, but also, your wider team, maybe your family, or that you can take forward and just these little nuggets really help to understand how you can try and keep hold of that?
Well, it opens up the employment market, doesn't it? Because you don't have to just recruit from your area. You can recruit from a much, much wider, my colleagues are all over the place. But I think that the agile working piece is a really interesting one, because one of the key reasons that it hasn't really taken off, pre-COVID, was around trust and the ability of leadership and managers to trust the process. It's, if I can't see them, they're not working. And what COVID did was it actually forced that trust issue. They had no choice, So, and actually what they've discovered, and all the research that's going on about this, their people are more productive because they're managing to work in a way, and God, I feel like I've been working night and day for the last year, but people are managing to switch on and switch off and getting, they're working more productively. And so some of that trust element has been forced on managers. And I think the research says something like 70 to 80% of employees want to keep an element of flexibility. I think there will always be a role for offices and things like that, because that's when we come together, isn't it? It's when we come together, it's when we meet clients, it's when we engage, do project work, all that sort of stuff. So the office is not going away, but you might only go there 2-3 days a week rather than all the time. I mean, obviously the BoConcept business, we have to be in the store. But, having said that, if someone's got a really detailed design to do, sometimes the interior designers, they get so involved with it. Actually, being in the middle of a store is quite disruptive for them. So being able to go somewhere else and create those designs without, having to keep one eye on the door is quite useful. So I think we just need to be bolder. The harsh reality is, coming out of this, businesses are going to have to look at their financials, and the two things that they can really influence is their property and their people. And to make costs and become more financially efficient, if they can cut their property costs, then that's going to help massively. So they don't need all this square footage that they've been renting. If they can be a bit more, and it's a win-win situation. They've created a wellness program for their employees. They've just created more resource, or more opportunity for resource. They're keeping everyone happy, and they're doing all these other things, and they're cutting their property costs. Why wouldn't you do that? Especially when you know.
Right. So I've got a question from Imogen.
Just a quickie, Rachel. When we did our mission vision, and we had ideas that we wanted to expand the hall and so on, and I was just going to ask you whether you'd be willing just to share your experience with Manchester Airport, because I thought that illustrates your your point about property really well.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I'm not quite sure how confidential this is actually.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, maybe.
But basically,
Well done,
the
Imogen.
upshot is, and I think so this was when I was a partner of a very large, one of the largest surveying practices in the world. It was a big part of my life, and often clients think they know the answer, but they don't actually. And it comes back to, what are you using that space for? How are you going to use it forward? And we found ourselves with clients, almost doing ourselves out of work, because they would be wanting to do a big scheme, or spend millions of pounds on a new part of the building. And as consultants, the way we differentiated our business was to go in and go, and why do you want this? And and try to find a better way of delivering it. And sometimes that was a new building, sometimes it was a refurb, sometimes you were coming up with innovative ideas. You guys will know I'm a big fan of modular housing and modular buildings, and if you want to create buildings quickly, it's a really good way of doing it. So actually looking, the management consultants talk about it, starting with the end in mind. What is it you're trying to achieve, and working back from there? And that's the journey you go on. And we use it in BoConcept as well. We say to our, especially on the contract side, what is it you're trying to achieve? And then we'll figure out how we do that, rather than, we'll just play about with stuff and see how it goes. And then you end up with something that you didn't really want,
I thank you. I think that's really crucial, because you go to the end and then work backwards. We've all been doing that, the end being when we will get out of lockdown, and working backwards. I feel like we've done that the whole year. Plan to replan. I've got another question coming from my sister, actually. So I didn't ask her to do this, because she's incredibly supportive. So she wanted to, this is a good one, actually. What do people think might be the barriers to us all taking key learnings from this whole experience forward? I think that's a great one, Kel. And then practically, how do we harness these great learnings and maybe that's something you could talk a bit more about in breakout. So this is a nice bit for the next session. But yeah, what do we think the barriers are going to be to taking these learnings forward? Rachel or Caroline?
Yeah, I can pick that one. I think there's two. Psychologically, we're like, oh my God, thank God it's over. I want to get back to my old life. And you know what? I've worked through, I think, 5 recessions now. You never go back to your old life after things like this. It's a fundamental shift in society. So we can get that out of our heads straight away. But also, I think it's about awareness. So just sitting down and saying, okay, what are the things I want to keep, and creating, being more aware of the benefits. Because I think we've just all sort of been going, all the way along. But actually sitting down, and from a business perspective, we've gone massively into digital. It would be madness to go back on that, because we know it's generally that, that's the flow of traffic. But how do we embed that in a way that works for us going in the future? So for me, it's about awareness.
Great, thank you, Caroline.
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to echo that, really. I think, humans by our very nature are kind of creatures of comfort. And as you alluded to, we have been waiting for this to finish. So everyone's kind of like, I can't wait until I can XYZ, can't wait till I can return to normal. And I think it's going to be a bit about really being overt and recognize, and as you say, Rachel, being aware of what the things are that we do want to retain, because it will be very, very easy just through that kind of, I don't know, lack of momentum or lack of objective momentum to try and to sort of slide back. I think, one of the things for me, we were talking about working hours and shifts and how we work. The thing that I just fairly recently, which really interested me, was the Monday to Friday 9 to 5 kind of 40-hour working week actually came about through Ford. Thomas Henry Ford and his production line. And he worked out, doing various different, probably highly unethical experiments or whatever, that was the longest time that a human person could stand up at a production line and still be productive. It was the optimal efficiency for making cars and bits on a production line in, 100 years ago. And in the kind of 100 years pre-COVID, post that, productivity, individual workers' productivity increased by 200%, and yet that was never reflected in the working, in our working patterns. They were so entrenched in culture and accepted norms that even though there was lots of justification and really good science behind actually why we ought to possibly work slightly differently and you get more out of people, we didn't change it. I don't know why. I don't know who were the decision makers, or it was just easy not to. So I think it's that really mindful desire to make those permanent change, to embed those in the new kind of melange between the professional and the personal kind of work-life balance. So I think it will have to be deliberate in order to attain. So I think that's a risk, personally.
Mm. No, I think it's a really fair point, and it kind of gets back to I always try and focus on few key things, because there's so much in having a team, whether you're a one-person independent business, whether you 3, 10, 25, and actually that keeping an eye on the value and output. It kind of relates back to what you were saying, Rachel, about output, actually productivity. And yes, I've discovered, and a lot of us, I know friends of mine discovered, that we're better at the weekend doing certain things than we were during the week. And then there was all that tussle of, I shouldn't work at the weekend, I need to keep that precious, and actually I think that's a risk. I think that's a big risk, particularly when we go back to something which some semblance of things reopening. So I certainly don't want to lose that, but I think there is a risk that your optimum productivity could be not the ideal time or not the norm time. So for me, that's the norm. But yeah, thank you so much to you both. I'm just aware of time. We could talk for a lot longer, and I'm sure further down the line we'll be able to all meet together in the space at Westgate Hall for a much longer session, but maybe that's for the future planning. But now what I'd like to say is thank you so much to both of our speakers. It's been incredible, really inspiring, and helped us to kind of springboard into the next part of it, which is the breakout sessions. Before I do that, I'm just going to hand over to Lisa Carlson, Chief Executive of the BID. She's going to say a few things to give you an update, and also then we're going to throw over to Dawn Lillford. So I'll just hand over to Lisa Carlson for this moment.
Claire, thank you so much. And the first thing I want to say is thank you to you and Imogen and Bryony on the Westgate Hall side, and also to Rachel Pillard and Emily Wells on the BID side for pulling this together, and especially to Caroline and Rachel for sharing your stories. Life gets so busy. I had forgotten what it feels like to hear each other's stories, and it's so inspirational. I know that's the word we're using, but it really, really is. And I feel like I need some more time to digest it all. But it's also really motivating when you do that. So thank you. Also, a quick shout out to accountants who we have a few from accounting firms today, but not many. And that's because they're all digesting the budget announcements. I think none of us have paid as much attention to the budget announcement as we have this year. And they're all running seminars and workshops on our behalf so we can better understand the nuance of what's been announced. And also to our universities and colleges who are preparing for the return of at least some students from Monday. So thinking of them in particular, but also it's just great to see all of you. So I'm Chief Exec of the Business Improvement District in Canterbury. I'm also Chair of the Association of Town and City Management. So I work with placemakers, could be business improvement districts, local authorities and others across the UK and Ireland, and that's been particularly helpful over this last year. I just want to talk for a couple of minutes about what we do as a BID in this community, but also why we have reasons for hope, which I think we'll discuss more in our breakout sessions. So we are what's called a business improvement district. We are an independent business-led not-for-profit initiative, so we entirely independent, and we exist for 5 years at a time. So we were voted in 2014 and again in 2019, and that's because all of you who run businesses in Canterbury City Centre, which is the area we look after in our case, you vote whether or not you want to pay into the bid every 5 years. So it is your business improvement district, your money, and we work on your behalf. So we're managed by a small team, and also a voluntary board of directors, which I'll come on to in just a moment. But nationally, there are over 320 business improvement districts around the country, investing over 150 million in their respective areas. And these are all, and I think this is a crucial thing, these are business-led initiatives, because I think it's important for a business community to have a voice. And it's about, again, that independent voice of our business community. We use the word business as a bit of shorthand. What we mean is all bricks and mortar. So that could be a social enterprise, that could be a shop, a restaurant, a church, a charity. It's any bricks and mortar in our space. And of course, the relationships and interactions we have with people around us across the district and the county are important as well. Our job is to support business, and our mission is to make Canterbury vibrant, exciting, successful. And here's also the important bit. An attractive, clean and green and safe environment for everyone. So everyone who lives here, who works here, who visits, our students, it needs to be about everyone. And that means that our work touches on things like, marketing campaigns, of course, and there's a fantastic campaign that's been put together in collaboration with the City Council, with Visit Canterbury, with Visit Kent, and with us, also working with others like Produced in Kent and a number of businesses and organisations who run events. So really great campaign for reopening and recovery. We do the Christmas lights and the floral displays. We run events and support events that drive footfall and spend when it's safe to do so. So there were smaller events over the last year and virtual events that were really successful. And as we're seeing with Zoom, some of the virtual stuff can expand our reach in some ways and enable more of us to join in, which is brilliant. We do training and networking and business support, also focusing on access to financial support in a lot of different areas. We've vinyled a number of our windows across the city, and that's an exciting opportunity. We have a current project right now looking at vinyling windows for Canterbury and Bloom, and we have a great problem, which is that the windows we wanted to use, we can't use because so many of the businesses, the premises are under offer. So there is reason for hope amongst all the challenges. I also just want to mention, we do a lot of lobbying, and I think that takes time, doesn't cost money, but usually doesn't cost money, takes a lot of time. So we do sometimes pay to facilitate consultations when we really, when that's really important. For example, recently with parking. I just wanted to give the local plan a quick shout out. The Canterbury City Council is in the process of developing and working on the local plan, and we all need to pay attention to that because it's going to impact all of us. We are working on our own statement, which we'll put out there, which others can use to submit theirs, but it will affect what our city looks like in the future. And so, we'll be communicating a lot about that. Also about climate change. We're involved in a number of different areas there, looking at plastic free. We're involved with that group, but also trade waste and recycling. We want to provide a better service for businesses in the city, but also help reduce emissions. We don't need 6 or 7 different companies driving lots of large vehicles in and around the city and the county. So there's a lot of work that can be done there. And we're also leading the waste group for the council's Climate Action Partnership Board. So there'll be a lot more on that. And of course, we're part of the community-led group, which is the Canterbury Climate Action Partnership, and particularly looking at the work they're doing on retrofitting buildings and also new building regulations, not only for housing, because that's going to impact the city, of course, a lot more in the future, but also for businesses. And then there's a lot of press and radio, and a shout out to Sarah Wren and her team from Oscar and Bentley's for their great spot on Radio 1 yesterday. That was fantastic. I often get called on by regional radio and television, but last week was brilliant because I'd been in my jeans and leggings for so long, but because it was TV, I had to put some work clothes on, which I've done today too, just because, it's exciting. So that's a bit about what we do. I want to give us some reasons for hope. I firmly acknowledge the challenges we have. This is not over. We've been unpicking, the budget, just to pick a few things. The split reopening of hospitality is not ideal. I think we'd all crossed our fingers and hoped that business rates relief would last a year. It's not. We're aware of the potential cash flow crunch as businesses reopen. There hasn't been any support and still isn't any support for our coach sector. And international tourism roadmap is not clear, and that of course is so important for Canterbury and Kent. So I mean, we could go on and on and on. The challenges don't end here. But we have a lot of reasons for hope and things that we want to take forward. I was going to touch on collaboration, but Caroline covered that. I don't think I could add to that. Caroline, you articulated that so beautifully. But that's something we want to take forward, and that has happened in so many new and different and wonderful ways, locally, regionally, nationally. But the reason there are many reasons for hope. But here are just a few. In the Canterbury area, there are just under 8,000 people who have season tickets to London, and they haven't been using them as much. I do think we will see a return to offices. I'll touch on that in a second. But at the moment, people are thinking more of that in September. I think once we've done our risk assessments, and for those of us who have just bought dogs, got them trained up, we'll probably head back to the office sooner than people are talking about now. But nonetheless, there's going to be a different balance. And I think, those 8,000 people certainly did in July, August, September, spend more time in Canterbury. And I think they will now going forward. Canterbury and East Kent has become an increasingly popular place to live and work. So we're going to see, and we know we're going to see more housing. We do have to work on challenging the Kent brand and supporting it, because we're right up there with Brazil and South Africa, unfortunately, at the moment. But we will be doing a lot to attract our staycationers, and I do think we will see them. Our footfall was only 15% down in August, and that was well beyond what we saw regionally and nationally, with the exception of some coastal towns and cities. So the staycation market was strong. I know we're all waiting with bated breath on what's going to happen with the Gulf Open, and that will be crucial for our accommodation sector, and even Wimbledon, because the kind of events you can have off the back of that. So crossing our fingers there. But we've seen a rise in localism, and the work that all of you have done to move online and to support, and just picking up what Caroline was talking about, to support the local community, because a lot of the work that was done in the first lockdown by businesses was because we needed it. We needed to access food. We needed to know how to do that, and other essential services. But also the local community has responded, and I think there'll be more to come. Just a few things to finish up. We had 22 new businesses open between March and December last year, including 2 in the November lockdown. I think we need to take a moment to digest that. Yes, there's a lot of change. We also had 23 close. We know there are a number of CVAs and businesses in administration. Some of that was pre-COVID, had nothing to do with COVID. Some of it is because of COVID, and we might see a bit more, but we still have a really strong interest in Canterbury. I mean, just our bloom vinyls, Rachel and I are struggling we will find the windows to put them on, but so many of our businesses are under offer. The Hampton by Hilton is opening soon on St. Margaret Street. Debenhams, a company called 1517, will be going into there, covering about 80% of the main store area soon. The only reason the former Nason site is held up is because of the Stodmarsh. That's nothing to do with COVID. That's due to the pollution from the Stour River Valley going into the Stodmarsh Nature Reserve, and that is something where we need national involvement, and a number of agencies looking for a solution, but great plans there. Fenwick have talked to us recently about all the investment that they've made into their store ahead of reopening. I mean, a lot of signs for hope. We've got citywide Wi-Fi that's going live soon, and the over £350 million in development that, pre-COVID, that we knew was happening in Canterbury is still going ahead. Now, COVID accelerates the trend in retail that we're seeing, but it also can slow down some of the new things that we want to see coming in. So there's a bit of, you know, that's part of the challenge, but we have a lot to be encouraged by. I quickly want to mention that as a BID, we are running board elections in March. We do that once during every 5-year BID term. We have 21 nominees for 14 positions, which is fantastic. I mean, we are so privileged to have that interest in the running of the BID from our business community. We currently have 3 women on the board, but 6 of the current nominees are women, and they're all on this session today. And I would say, Rachel, we're definitely looking for enablers and disruptors. I think that was really well put. So thank you for that. That's exactly what any board needs. And we welcome that. A final thought from me. Normally when Rachel Pillard and I prepare for press, we do script it, because we know that every breath is a soundbite, and we know that we need to speak well on your behalf. So we have a number, you know, of stories and scripts and stats that we're prepared to talk about. But last week, the BBC asked me a question I wasn't prepared for. They asked me to paint a picture of what it's going to be like and how people will feel when Canterbury reopens again. And what came out of my mouth was about community, because what I remember from reopening the last time is how good it felt to see people in the flesh, how good it felt to interact again, how great it was not to cook on that first weekend in July, and we were out as a family for breakfast, lunch and dinner. But I think that is the thing where we, in a sense, not that we won't go back to normal, but I think we do all want that sense of interaction with each other again. So thank you again for this session today and for the opportunity to give you a little bit of an update.
Thank you, Lisa. There's an extraordinary amount the BID does, and well done for getting into that time. It's really great to hear from it. I've got a quick question, which is from someone I know called Sandra, who's on the call on this, and she's asked about Thanet and do they have their own BID? Well, I can tell you they don't. Unfortunately, they should have. Because I'm a great advocate. However, there are other BIDs in Kent, aren't there, Lisa? And that's a whole other conversation, I'd say, Sandra. I'm happy to talk to you about it offline. It might be quicker because we've got quite a lot to get on with now in terms of breakouts. Is that all right? Thumbs up? Okay, thank you. So we've got just one more person to speak. We've got Dawn Lillford, who's going to do hopefully a brief summary of a great launch she's doing today. I'm going to throw over to you, Dawn, and then we're going to breakout sessions. Some other people have had to leave, some for different reasons, COVID, vaccinations, all sorts, but all the comments have been really positive. And I'll just go over to Dawn now, please. Thank you. So here you go.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dawn Lillford, and along with my husband, David, I own and run Lillford Framing and Galleries. However, I am also the current president of Soroptimist International Canterbury. And the reason I'm speaking to you this morning is to launch Soroptimist International Canterbury's Inspirational Woman of the Year 2021. And I have to say, I couldn't wish for a better platform to launch this award following Caroline and Rachel. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Okay, a bit of background about Soroptimist, because I dare say most of you haven't heard of Soroptimist. Soroptimist International is a global volunteer movement whose members work together to transform the lives of women and girls. Soroptimist International is committed to a world where women and girls achieve their individual and collective potential and have equal voice in creating strong and peaceful communities. We hold we hold consultative rights at the UN and are recognised as non-governmental organisation representing women. Our network consists of around 80,000 club members in 121 countries. And it works at an international, national and local level to educate, empower and enable opportunities for women and girls. Soroptimist International consists of 5 federations. The Canterbury Club is part of Soroptimist International of Great Britain and Ireland. SI Canterbury has been making a difference to the lives of women and girls since 1961. We achieve this through what we call programme action. work focused on education, empowering and enabling women and girls, awareness raising, advocacy and action, as well as through partnerships. Local ones are mentioned on this next slide. Our work or programme action is undertaken as a whole club, small groups or as individuals, and is logged with Sir Optimist International. In June this year, SI Canterbury celebrates its 60th birthday, and as part of our celebrations, we will be recognising one of Canterbury's women by awarding them Canterbury's Inspirational Woman of the Year. We're looking for women who, through their kindness, hard work and determination, have either transformed your life or the lives of others. Those women who have advanced and supported the role of women in our community, whether it's through education, charity, or by example. She might be a family member, a friend, a neighbour, or a colleague. And this past challenging year has enabled us to discover more about the amazing women around us. So a little bit of admin for you. We need to have received your nominations by midday on Monday, the 24th of May. You must have the explicit consent of the nominee and any other person mentioned in your nomination to pass their details to us. The nominee must be aware that part of the prize is attending the Woman of the Year award presentation on Saturday, 19th of June, and that £100 will be donated to a charity of their choice. So this International Women's Day, please join us to celebrate our 60th year by sending us your nominations and sharing our event. Full details, including criteria and entry form, can be found on our Facebook page and website, which Rachel will be sharing with you. Thank you so much to Claire and Rachel for making room for me to speak to you, and to all of you for listening. I look forward to receiving your nominations, and if anyone would like more information about being a Sir Optimist, you can get in touch with us through the same Facebook page and website address. And that's all from me. Happy International Women's Day. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dawn. I really appreciate that. Great to launch it today. It's so important to know more about you as well, which we do now. And with that, I'm going to move on to the last part of our session, which is the breakout. Given the time, and unfortunately some people have had to duck out for different reasons, we're going to make it slightly shorter, but it will be facilitated. And the most important thing for you to know before you go into the breakout groups, you don't need to do anything, is that the posed question is, we've all gained something during the pandemic. What have you or your business gained during that pandemic that you don't want to lose sight of, and how can you retain this going forwards into 2021? And I will also say, I think there'll be small enough groups that you can contribute. If you don't feel like you want to contribute, you just want to put it in the chat or just put your hand up, then I'm sure the facilitators will make it really clear to you how everything will go. So you've got Bryony, Imogen, myself, Lisa and Rach and Emily. Apologies, and Emily. So we'll see you shortly, and then there'll be a 1 minute warning to you all before you come back, and I'll do a brief summing up and give you some other information about what we're going to do going forward, because I think it's been really great to see so many people today, and we'd like to do this again in the future.